For those of you who are new to me, my name is Bert Herald. I'm a dietitian. I work at Carilion Clinic. I do outpatient counseling primarily for weight loss, weight management. Um, and I see it's doing a transcript. That is lovely. Um, anyway, a transcript on this one. Um, I primarily counsel weight management. I work at ION, which is the Institute of Orthopedic and Neurosciences. It's the building. It used to be the old U Crops, and it's on Franklin and Wanju Streets near Mellow Mushroom, and Walgreens is over there. And what I've done since about 2018 is I will do these classes, usually about every other month or so. Before COVID, they were in person. Now they have been sort of alternating. I've done a couple of in-persons since COVID, but really it's been mostly virtual. So this is my virtual offering, and moving into next year, I might go back to in-person. We'll see. We can do in-person again. We just have to have social distancing and limit the attendance to about 10. But there is a nice little sort of kitchen space, and there's a diabetes center that we use, and there's a little kitchen, and I can sort of prepare food there and stuff like that. So we'll see what happens in 2023 on that. But I think to round out this year, we're going to do this class. I'm hoping to do one more end of October, and then we will be done until January. So that's kind of how it's looking right now. What I'd like to do real quick here, I'm going to kind of jump ahead. Usually I do food at the end, but I've got some salmon and some cod fillets that I'm going to be cooking, and I'm going to go ahead and get that started. So while I'm talking, it'll actually be cooking. So what I'd like to do, and apologize for jiggly camera here for a couple seconds, but I'm just going to show you real quick, hopefully, just this is kind of a shake and bake, I guess, kind of thing here. So what this is there's a mixture of herbs in here. It's mostly Parmesan. There's a little bit of thyme. There's a little bit of flour in it, and that's really about it. You sort of shake this around. You coat the fillets. There's 3 fillets in here of cod, and there's 1 fillet of salmon, and that's because I actually had a salmon fillet that I forgot to cook. So I decided I'd throw it in here with the other fish tonight. So there's 4 fillets total. They're each probably about 4 ounces or so, I think. So I've already kind of pre-shook this bag. So what I'm going to do, and I think I'm just going to give up on this camera over here because the cord's not long enough. So I'm going to put this back over here, and you can sort of look at me long distance here as I load this into the oven. So, and I got a microphone on, so you won't lose my audio, hopefully. And what I can do is show you that process. I do very easy recipes. I am not a chef. I am not doing recipes that takes a lot of skill in the kitchen or any particular culinary expertise. Part of that's because of my own preferences. Part of it's also because when I'm trying to get patients to change how they eat, I don't want to have barriers to entry and reasons why they say they can't do whatever it is. So this is a recipe that's off of My Plate, which is a free website run by the USDA, and I'm going to talk about that at the end of my talk. We're going to go into that a little more detail. But what I do is just arrange these on a sheet. So I don't know how well that comes through, but I just put a little bit of olive oil on that cookie sheet on a piece of aluminum foil, and I put the coated fish on there, and I'm just going to cover this with another piece of aluminum foil. I found that actually helps it cook a little better, keeps the fish from drying out. So it's kind of an aluminum foil sandwich there. And I'm going to load it into this oven at 450. And the recipe actually calls for 350. So I might have some kind of dried out fish here, but I've done this a lot with salmon, and it works pretty well. 15 to 20 minutes with thawed salmon. They talk about using whitefish. Now, whitefish might cook a little faster than the salmon. I'm not sure. We're going to give it a try. And so the main thing is I just want to make sure it's well cooked, and it should flake. You know, fish should always kind of flake easily when it's cooked. And you can measure the internal temperature as well. But so we're going to get that started in about 20 minutes. That should be done. And then I've got some other things I'm going to do here. When that happens, I'm going to cook some rice. I'm going to saute some vegetables. And so you'll see all that. So welcome aboard to whoever just joined. I heard a little bleep bleep over here. So I'm going to switch over, I think, as long as there's no messages or anything. Okay, it looks like I've got a good little group, like 5 or 6 people in here. So we got somebody waiting in the lobby still. I thought I turned that off, so make sure they come in. Okay, I think we're all set. So I'm going to go ahead and share my talk with you guys. And let's see here. All righty, so everyone nod their head if they're seeing a slide now on the screen. Seeing a slide? Yes, no? Is that a no or is that a yes? No, there's no slide. Okay, great. Let me see what in the world's going on here. You'll need to go back to the window you were sharing. Fun times. All right. So it said I was sharing. Okay, stop sharing. Now, do you see me? Have you been seeing me the whole time? Did it ever show you anything else?
It showed the join screen for the Teams meeting.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. Well, let's try this again. Share. Let's try share screen. I think I did window. That might have been the reason. Okay, are you seeing the desktop of my computer now? Oh, good. Okay. How about now? Got a slide there? Yay, all righty. Thank you for my tech support here. Okay, we are in business. As you can see, it's a low budget affair here. I don't have any sidekicks to help me with the tech, but generally it's pretty straightforward, not a big deal. So this is another in a series of my talks. Like I say, this one's about weight management with food labels and portions. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. And I threw in a couple little bonus slides. I like to sometimes spread this message. And it's just for those of us who are, working on our weight, I think our goal is really just to just be. We don't want to be using tools for the rest of our lives. We don't want to be focused on weight. And that's kind of the dilemma with weight management. And that's a problem that is hard to crack. And honestly, it is. I have lost a lot of weight. I've lost 100 pounds, kept it off for about 10 years. I have not really had a lot of time during that 10 years where I've been able to just put it all aside and like, well, I'm just letting myself be. I'm following all my natural cues. Everything's great and there's no regain. I wish I could say that was the case, but it's really not always that way. And I've had some regains that I've had to really fight back to get off again. So this is just sort of this question or this statement that's out there. Am I always destined to be on a diet? I would say the answer to that's pretty complicated. Not really always on a diet, but there's going to be times when you will have to kind of bring back in some of the tools to kind of really buckle down, unfortunately. And then there'll be times when you can sort of more or less eat healthy, stay active, and you'll be fine. You won't really see gaining. But just keep in mind, what the evidence shows really usually is that you do have to have some ongoing vigilance with this. It's hard to just be, but I'm still striving for that. There are times when I am, there's times when I'm not. So moving forward here, if it will let me move forward. Okay, what are we doing? Let's see here. There we go. So another message here I like to spread for people is you are worth it. You can become a better version of you. You matter. A lot of times I think there's a problem here where people feel like in some sense they don't matter. It's not worth it. They'd rather just sort of, go to the pantry, sort of, feed the emotions, that kind of thing. And sort of sometimes what underlies that, there is a lot of psychology with weight management. Sometimes there's issues with self-worth and just sort of like, you know, we can sort of put aside our health goals because we just don't feel it's that important. We have to really stay focused on that we are important. Our health goals are very important because this is a high motivation process. You have to have a lot of motivation. You have to have ongoing high motivation to really see ongoing successful, significant weight loss. And we have to have that high sort of self-esteem built into that mix. So, and please, anyone, if you're no longer seeing slides, if something funky happened, I just noticed my screen changed, please unmute, chime in, let me know. Otherwise, I won't know. But you should be seeing the slide that says outline right now. And tools to assist in portion control for weight management and understanding food labels. That's what we're talking about today. So cooking accessories and food scales. And if somebody cares to unmute, I'd just like to pose a question. Uh, do you have a food scale? Just chime in and say yes. If do you own a food scale?
I do.
Great. Okay. Anyone else care
I
to
do.
share? Yay, we got two. Anyone else?
Yes.
Three. Okay, so we got probably a majority tonight have a food scale. So a lot of my patients do not have food scales. And actually a fair number of my patients do not have bathroom scales either, which is a whole nother thing. But food scales these days, especially, and I think they've always been actually fairly inexpensive. I think most of us who are probably over the age of, I don't know, 20, 30, we remember the spring-loaded scale with the little needle that bounced around. I mean, those weren't perfect, but they were good enough. I mean, you could basically track with those. You could figure out how many ounces or grams you're dealing with. Nowadays, we have the digital scales. They come in all different forms. The digital scales are great because you can do the tare function, so you can zero things out. You can use different size containers and zero everything out with the container and then put in your berries or your nuts and seeds and all that kind of stuff. So it is more precise than measuring cups and spoons, kind of measuring things by weight. Now, what I will say is, we have to cut ourselves a break a little bit too when we're doing weight management and you're trying to figure out calories. I mean, it doesn't have to be down to the fraction of a gram. I mean, we do the best we can. You try to be really accurate, but the name of the game really is to track and to get those numbers in and figure out what's going on more so than it is, getting too stressed about that. So just keep that in mind. If you're OCD, I tend to be that way sometimes. I mean, you can try to get things down to the fraction of a gram, but I mean, really the calories differences are not enough to worry about that. Features to look for: ease of use, easy to read. Again, the tare feature. I think they all, well, easy to read is going to be user dependent, but I think they all have the tare feature, and generally these days they all read out in ounces. And one thing about the ounces, and you've probably seen this, the labeling is really kind of converting to ounces um, more and more. I'm sorry, from ounces to grams. I misspoke. It's converting mostly to grams now. So the primary serving information you're going to see is going to be grams on most stuff. You'll still see cups sometimes, but we're kind of turning into a grams situation. Um, Measurements: have a set of measuring cups and spoons. I think that's, probably pretty obvious. I don't know. A lot of people, though, amazingly enough, I mean, they may not have cups and spoons or measuring spoons. So, I mean, they're very cheap. It's good to have them on hand. Um, in the dietetics world, we counsel people on how to use their hand to sort of eyeball a plate, figure out your portions. Again, not super precise, but I feel like this is helpful if you go to a buffet, if you're at somebody's house, you may not be able to break out the food scale, let's just be honest. That'd be kind of odd, probably. But, or a measuring cup. So you can sort of visualize, and you get better at this over time. The more you track, the more you record calories and foods and portions and stuff like that, you do get better at this kind of eyeballing stuff. The big thing I would say, I think I got another picture. Yeah. The big thing I would say with portions, really, what I use a lot myself is this baseball or the fist. So the baseball is about a cup volume, and the fist is also roughly about a cup volume. Now, people's fists are different sizes, obviously. So that's not super duper precise, but it's close enough. to kind of get you where you need to be. So if you're at a buffet, there's mac and cheese, big thing of mac and cheese. If you're managing your weight, you really, especially for women, generally you don't want more than that one baseball size. And I actually, quite honestly, probably want half a baseball for mac and cheese anyway. Maybe rice, maybe cereal, you can do the baseball size. The baseball size for most carbohydrates and most starchy things, when you don't add butter or cheese, just the basic starch, usually is about 200 calories. So you can sort of take that to the bank more or less, just, estimate that's 200 calories. Now, if it's mac and cheese, if you have a lot of butter in the potatoes, that kind of stuff, it's going to be more than that. And how much more is just, it's hard to really say, probably 100 calories at least, I would guess. It depends on how it's made. But a good rule of thumb or a good rule of baseball or a good rule of fist or whatever you want to call it, try to keep your carbs, and not that I'm not anti-carb, not at all. I eat plenty of carbs. But for that particular thing, you know, limit to about a baseball, you're going to be in pretty good shape. Um, for diabetics, since that comes up sometimes, and one of the people tonight was talking about carb counting, half a baseball is about 15 grams of carbs. So a full baseball is 30 grams. We think in terms of 15-gram increments with carbs because that's just sort of a convenient, shorthand. So 15 grams of carb is considered to be a carb choice, or like a serving of carb, typically. Two carb choices, a baseball size. That's still pretty reasonable for carbs. When you get to 3 to 4 per meal, then you need to kind of probably call it quits on the carbs, typically for a balanced diet approach. You're trying to watch your sugars and stuff. So again, that's really kind of a key one. These other ones, so we have a thumb. The thumb is like an ounce of cheese, or it could be an ounce of meat. I use it a lot with cheese, and that's about an ounce. And really, we don't have much business eating more than an ounce of cheese at a serving. Kind of for the same reason as the baseball of carb. An ounce of cheese is, you're looking at usually 100, 150 calories. It does depend on the cheese. It will vary a bit. But if you couple the 100 with 200 of carb, you're looking at 300 calories. You don't have a lot more left for your meat, and maybe for your, maybe you have some other dairy or fruit or something. So limit it to about an ounce of cheese. And I actually kind of tell people, if you can, you're better off just not really eating cheese a whole lot. I mean, it does have calcium, but you're much better off if you can stomach it, if you can stand it, eat yogurt. I know some people do not like yogurt, but if you do, try to get yogurt in as your dairy. That's going to give you the calcium and the vitamin D, or have a glass of milk, or have a glass of, alternative dairy, soy milk, rice milk, whatever. That's just a side thing. But for meat, the deck of cards is sort of the thing you want to look at there. That's going to give you about 3 ounces of meat. Honestly, 3 ounces, I think, is a little lean on the protein. Most people that I counsel, they need 4 ounces maybe, or maybe even 5, to try to meet their protein goals for the day. Um, 3 ounces is kind of really the bare minimum. I mean, you at least want that size if you're having meat. Now, if you're not having meat, if you're having beans, that's a whole different thing. Beans, you need a higher volume to meet the same protein as a deck of cards. So, and I don't want to get too bogged down in too many minutia here, but anyway, but if you're going to look at a plate, typically, if I were just going to make a very basic plate, you have, maybe some rice, some pasta, baseball size. You have your deck of cards of maybe chicken or turkey. You might have a thumb size of some sprinkled cheese, on there. You'd want maybe a glass of milk for your dairy, which isn't really shown here. And then some fruits and vegetables. Again, we invoke the baseball fruits and vegetables. Um, about a cup volume is a serving of fruit or a serving of vegetable chopped. And really, you want at least 1 or 2 of those at every meal every day. And that's a huge goal. Most people are not doing that. I can tell you right now, maybe 1 out of 10 of my patients does that. There are some that do, and I'm always, just jumping up and down for joy when I see that. If you do that, you'll get about 30 to up to 40 grams of fiber a day, but you'll at least get, at minimum, you'll get 20 to 30. Some people are able to get a little more. And that's really good for your gut health. That's really good to help you manage your weight. There's just a lot of amazing things with our fruits and our vegetables. I mean, cancer prevention, sort of things. So anyway, so here we go again. This is another view of this. I believe this slide I got from the Diabetes Prevention Program, which is kind of a CDC approved curriculum for helping people manage their weight. It's really just the same thing we just talked about. I just thought it was kind of cool to get a different view of that. Um, a cup is like the fist. Again, you can see how that fist is about the size of an apple. So again, that's a serving of fruit is about the size of that baseball or that cup, that fist. Um, Again, we have 3 ounces is roughly kind of the size of your hand. I like to think of the deck of cards personally, but whatever floats your boat on that. And then we have a couple other things, quarter cup for nuts and seeds. That's a good portion of nuts and seeds. Again, if we're managing our weight, typically you don't want to have a big open can of Planters peanuts there and just go and keep on going until the cows come home. You want to try to limit it to about the palm of the hand, about a quarter cup. So measurements, choose my plate. This is a very basic education. Honestly, choose my plate, the my plate symbol, it's taught in schools. I think, starting in the kind of K through 6 or whatever grades. I mean, they have these up on the walls of the cafeterias. It's a very simple model, but it's still, I mean, if we eat like this, we would have a lot less diabetes and heart disease, honestly. I mean, if we just had half our plate with fruits and vegetables on it, that alone would, I mean, unless the fruits and vegetables are deep fried somehow or, bathed in sugar, generally, if you did that, I mean, that alone would be enough of a change. I mean, some people could even just lose weight from that. That's just a message I think to just keep sort of bringing home to people as much as possible. And then the grains, mostly whole grains is what we want to shoot for. We don't want the white bread products and the crackers and the chips and the processed foods and all that kind of stuff. We want mostly whole grains. And then protein, lean protein, chicken, turkey, fish, chicken without the skin, beans, nuts, seeds. Those are all your really healthy, kind of good proteins. Beef and pork, you can get leaner cuts of beef. Um, Pork a little harder, maybe to get a leaner cut of pork, but generally we like to just advise people to be a little more sparing on those. Those are the fattier meats, and that's not as good for your heart health. So that's the basic idea with all that. And this is another breakdown of that same picture. This shows you portions and stuff for the different food groups. And I'll usually go over this with patients, and I'm not going to belabor it tonight. But and it's all online as well. If you go to the USDA, go to myplate.gov. You can look at these guides, and they'll actually help you custom which guide is appropriate for you based on what calorie needs it thinks you should have. And that's what I work with my patients too, kind of helping them decide on a calorie goal that makes sense. So leftovers and portion control, crucial element in weight loss program. So here we go. And you'll see some of these tonight, actually, when I'm showing you the cooking segment here. I really love these Pyrex ones, the glass storage. If you don't have these, and it's not just Pyrex, there's Anchor Hawking, and I'm sure there's some other brands out there. So, I mean, the glass is great, cleans well, doesn't hold on to odors like plastic does. If you start making more of your meals at home and not all just, let's say frozen meals or restaurants or takeout, whatever, what you'll notice sometimes is, some of these things when you cook meals, some of the spices, some of the things that you use, they will stain the plastic as well. I think turmeric is one I just encountered the other day. It's very healthy, but it stains everything kind of a yellow. So, and that's really hard to get out. So, we have that, but also the odors and things hold on to the plastic. So, and one of the other reasons, I'm sure if you follow the news, there's been things about, um, they call them PTFEs and some of these chemicals that are in various plastics like Teflon and things. And Pyrex has the little plastic lid, but I like it because it's mostly glass and you're not going to have as much of that. A lot of that's unknown what the impacts are to people, but more and more is coming out about plastics and food and just, flame retardants on our sofas and just so many things. So I try to minimize that and go with the glass. So that's my little spiel on that. Plastic, now that I've just demonized it, I will use plastic for cold things because the heat transfer, you're not picking up as much of the chemical kind of stuff. Um, I think it has a role. It's very convenient, for sandwiches, things that are cold, things that are not hot, things that aren't going to transfer odors. I think it's pretty safe for that. I would never use it for hot things ever, um, or anything that's kind of like casseroles and stuff that's kind of like that. That's moist. That might pick up stuff in the plastic. I don't do that, but it is convenient. And there's again lots of sizes. And for people that are trying to manage their weight, one of the key things is to portion control and to kind of know, how much we're dealing with. And these different containers at different volumes, you can figure out, this one holds this much, this many cups, and you can use that to help you sort of portion control. So I'm going to stand by just a second. I have to actually pull the fish out of the oven here, or it will be on fire, and that would be exciting maybe for the camera, but not something I want to deal with. So we're going to pull that out. All righty. And we're just going to let that kind of sit back behind me there. All righty. So a lot of folks are probably familiar with the Instant Pot. This is a slow cooker that can also be used for pressure cooking. I think the claim to fame is probably pressure cooking. My sister gave one to me for a birthday or Christmas a few years ago. Um, I'm a believer in slow cooking, and also for, if you do pressure cooking, whatever, these methods that are really good for fall and winter, the cold months. We're kind of moving into that now. Some of you probably noticed the weather is, are getting a little colder temps again, which is wonderful, I think. So that's kind of soup season. And, I like being able to kind of throw things in there and let it set overnight or during the day when you're doing other things. Um, so the good thing nutritionally is the nutrients are really kind of retained in the broth. You're not losing them, and it's just another convenient, kind of healthy thing to have in your arsenal, I guess you could say. The pressure cooking reduces time. I don't really use a pressure cooking feature, but there's nothing wrong with that. You know, more power to you if you want to do that. Um, it makes lots and lots of leftovers. And again, weight management, leftovers are your friend. For most people, not everyone, we're all a little different, but for the vast majority of people, they do not want to be making a meal every single night, something new and amazing. They want to sort of come home, they're exhausted, whatever, pop something in the microwave, pop it in the oven, whatever leftover that you already have, and you're good. Um, and this will make, I mean, easily 6, 8 leftovers for one person. And, hopefully you've got, a couple people in your house and you can split stuff and you're not just cooking for yourself. But, I'm married, but my wife and I do not eat the same. So a lot of times I am cooking for myself. And people complain to me and they'll say, I'm just cooking for myself. I don't feel like doing it. And it's just like, well, I mean, I know that, sometimes when you're living on your own, it feels depressing to cook for yourself, and I get that a lot. But the thing is, you can be married and still be cooking for yourself. So, I mean, uh, again, it kind of gets back to we have to sort of value ourselves. We have to realize, we're important, we matter, we need to have good health. And yes, I'm one person here, but I still deserve healthy meals, even if it's just me. um, we have to sort of we have to change our outlook a little bit and kind of think along those lines, I think. So food label, that's kind of the topic tonight, along with, portion control and everything else. The food label, this is from the FDA, and it kind of goes through the important features of the food label. And I don't want to belabor it too terribly much, but I think it's probably helpful to kind of go through it at least once with people because, not everyone's super familiar. We might just kind of glance at these labels, but we don't really worry about them too much. So for weight management, again, ding, 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 calories. I think we all know, calories is kind of king when it comes to weight management. Um, you may have heard otherwise. You may have heard different things. Um, unfortunately, when it really comes down to it, at the end of the day, calories are sort of what's going to really drive whether you lose weight or not. Now there are subtleties here. Um, there's been studies recently on processed foods. So, if we eat a lot of processed foods as opposed to eating mostly whole foods, whole grains, that kind of thing, if we're left on our own devices and we're not strictly tracking calories, if we just tell people, you know what, you're going to eat processed over here, group A, group B, you're going to eat whole foods, healthy, plant-based, whatever, just healthy, fresh foods. Doesn't have to be plant-based. But what they find is that the people who eat mostly processed, they gain weight. The people who eat mostly whole foods, natural foods, not processed, they actually lose weight or maintain weight. So that's where you'll hear people say a calorie is not a calorie, that the type of food matters. And there is truth in that. But the thing is, if you took that same experiment and you controlled the calories, if you said you're only allowed this many calories for each group, or let's just put it another way, you're only given the number of calories that you need to maintain your weight. If that was controlled carefully with both groups, whether it's processed or not, they would they would be the same weight. I mean, they would not gain or lose. So the upshot of all that is to make this process easier for you, to make it easier to lose weight, and healthier. You do want to eat less processed foods. Um, but at the end of the day, whether it's processed or not, or whatever, however we define processed, that's another discussion too. Um, at the end of the day, you need to keep the calories controlled however you're eating. So that's really the bottom line. I don't want to muddy it too much with the whole process thing, but um, but it is important, and I try to get my patients to eat as healthy as possible. On the flip side, we're all human. Sometimes we want some Haagen-Dazs. Sometimes somebody wants to get some pizza. I don't think that that means game over. You just track it, keep track of the calories, make sure you're not going overboard, and you'll be okay. I mean, you can lose weight a lot of different ways. So on the actual label, so at the very top, we got calories, we have serving size. So the way the label is sort of set up is, the FDA sort of determines some nutrients that they find are more important versus kind of less important. That's why we end up with like the vitamin D, the calcium, the iron, the potassium sort of at the bottom. I mean, they are important, otherwise we wouldn't have them on the label at all. There's so-called lesser important micronutrients, such as maybe phosphorus, that's not listed there. It doesn't mean it's not important for your health, but they sort of ranked the importance somewhat. I don't know. I don't know if it was completely arbitrary. Probably not. I'm sure there's a methodology for that. The upper part is going to be sort of your macronutrients. So that's going to be your fat, your carbohydrate, and your protein. Those are the three macronutrients that make up everything we eat. So those are kind of, you can sort of break down all foods in terms of those three quantities, protein, fat, carbohydrate. And those are what give us energy from our food, as well as, providing other things. But that's where the energy really almost exclusively comes from those three things. And so when we talk about different ways of dieting, and some people want to do lower carb, higher carb, whatever, we're sort of swapping back and forth usually between fat and carbohydrate, sometimes protein. Protein is a different kind of nutrient. We don't really want to cut protein ever. Regardless of whether you're doing keto or not, or balanced diet, you want to keep protein pretty robust, and for your diet throughout the day. So anyway, the nutrients of concern, I would say, for most patients are really, a lot of them are going to be in that upper block. You want to keep your saturated fat, so you see it towards the top, total fat. You want to keep that saturated fat as low as possible. If you could get it to 0, great. It's not usually very practical to get that to 0, but you want it to be pretty low. Trans fat is even worse than saturated fat for our heart health. You really want that to be at 0 all the time. You don't really want to see that showing up at all. Cholesterol, again, sort of want to keep that more minimal. Sodium, again, for the day, no more than 2,000 milligrams of sodium. So sodium doesn't give us calories at all, but it can, and it can, especially with some people, can really raise blood pressure. So we want to keep that generally around 300 or so or less for a portion, for a serving size, kind of thing, a typical portion that you're going to have. Um, so yeah, so this isn't exactly high sodium, but it's kind of pushing it. I would say high sodium, just ballpark. If you're getting 700 milligrams or above, that's high sodium, and that's something you want to try to change as far as how you normally would eat. Carbohydrates, we have that broken down into your fiber and sugars, and notice that sugars are split also into added sugars. So there are sugars that are inherent in foods. So like the lactose in milk is one, the fructose in an apple. As far as nutrition guidelines and what we think is healthy for people, um, we don't really count. So there's a caveat here, and I'll get to it in a second, but for a general population that's not diabetic, at least, we don't worry so much about the sugar part except for the added sugars. The added sugars you want to keep pretty minimal. That's sugars that are really representing processing of the food. And we get way too much of that in our diet. You really want, it's kind of like saturated fat. You want the added sugars to really be very, very low, unless you've made a decision, I'm going to have a cookie or I'm going to have, half a cup of ice cream for a treat. Sure. I mean, sometimes the added sugars play a role in our life. But in terms of our just day-to-day general meals that we're eating, you want to keep that pretty low. And 2 grams on here in this example is extremely low. I mean, below 10 grams, you're doing pretty good. If it gets above 10 grams, I would kind of throw the yellow flag. And if you're above 20, 30, then that's a red flag. Like, what are you doing? So that's kind of how that breaks down. Now, for a diabetic, things are a little different. I mean, you do, especially if you're on insulin. If you're on insulin, you really have to know the carb count, and it doesn't matter if it's an added sugar or not. You just need to know the total carb count. Um, the fiber really doesn't play a role in the blood sugar changes, other than it helps to slow your blood sugar rise. So fiber is a good thing, but fiber is not going to cause your sugar to go up. But I guess kind of confusingly, fiber is a carbohydrate. It's just one that doesn't affect our blood sugar, really. It's actually good for our blood sugar. It's not bad. Um, so generally though, for, diabetic, you're going to look at the total carb, and you need, if you're eating fruits, generally the recommendation is, you can have a serving of fruit with every meal, but you're not going to want to have 2, 3 servings of fruit. And you want to minimize the fruit because it does have, natural sugar in it. Uh, Vitamin D, I mean, we look kind of further down there. I mean, that's important for, obviously for bone development, and, works with calcium to absorb calcium a little better. And we got calcium on there as well. Iron, very important mineral, as well as potassium for heart health. Um, so these are all, that kind of rounds out the label. Now, there are labels that have more nutrients than this. If you look at a cereal box, which I was going to show here, time allowing, you will see more nutrients fleshed out. For some people, that can be important. Like if you're looking at phosphorus, for instance, if you're, if you've got kidney disease and you've been told to watch your phosphorus, we get into some situations where they're really tricky. These labels won't show you phosphorus usually, but for some reason with cereal, they will. Cereal's a little bit more fleshed out, but this is more your typical label here. So again, this is another view. Again, this is, I believe this is courtesy of the Diabetes Prevention Program materials again. Really, it just highlights what we just said. Serving size, limit these nutrients. You sort of have your fat, your saturated fat, trans fat, cholesterol, sodium. Those are sort of clustered in a way to kind of say, bring them to your attention. You know, most of those you want to limit. Fat, total fat's a little different beast than saturated and trans. If it's unsaturated fat like mono or poly, those are good for you generally, other than they have a lot of calories. If you're looking at calories, yeah, you have to pay attention to calories. But anyway, but the saturated, the trans are sort of the bad actors. Cholesterol, probably not a great actor. Sodium, not so great. So that's what the point of that. Um, the bottom there, we've got, again, some of the vitamins, calcium and iron. This particular label, they actually have vitamin A and vitamin C on it, so that's kind of neat. Um, so I don't know how many people find this confusing or not as far as serving and portion size, but other dietitians have used this in their educations, and so I decided, well, I'll join in the party and I'll throw it in mine. Um, so I mean, serving size is sort of on the label at the top. Portion, though, is what you're actually eating. So when we toss around serving portion, serving size is really just kind of a nomenclature for these labels. And when we talk about portion size, that's what you're, actually eating. So hopefully that makes sense. Sometimes it involves a little bit of math, and that may throw some people too. I don't know. I mean, it's not like we're doing calculus, but if you're eating 1.5 cups and the serving size says 1, you're going to have to multiply the calories 1.5, to get the calories for what you're actually eating. So I haven't had any patients come to me with that saying, how do I calculate that? And there could be some, sometimes people may be a little bit shy or ashamed that they're not sure how to do that, but um, it's that's really all there is to it, though. I mean, you just take that basic measurement at the top of the label, and you have to kind of scale it for whatever you're actually eating. And that food scale certainly comes in very handy for stuff like cereal. So this is kind of an interesting little thing. So you'll find sometimes, I don't want to say deceptive practices, but I mean, it's a little bit shaky what some of the food companies do with the labels and stuff in the industry, I think. But so spray butter is a very popular product. I use it a lot. I'm not against it really. I mean, some people, if you're a purist, you'll look and it's like, oh, this has got some stuff in it. It's got some preservatives. So yeah, it's not a health food, but but if you want that little butter flavor without getting it, slammed with saturated fat, this is a way to go, and has, for a single spray, this thing says 5 sprays on the label, 0 calories. So I mean, that's kind of a game changer for some people. If you just crave butter, but you don't want, your cholesterol's sky high, you don't want to get that hit, you can spritz a couple of these sprays and get that butter flavor, and no calories, no saturated fat. So that's great. However, um, human nature dictates that if it tastes good, we want more than just a couple sprays. So, well, 2 sprays pretty good. How about 10? How about 20? How about 30 sprays? Pretty soon your bread is, soggy with spray butter, and it tastes great, but guess what? 25 sprays, you start getting some calories. Now, 20 calories, not a big deal usually. But it's just to illustrate that, we have to look at the portion that we're taking in. The serving size, they say 0. It's really not 0 calories. It's some fraction of a calorie, you know. Um, and it's a little under 1, but it's not 0. So when you see something like that, just realize, if you go hog wild and use a lot of something that says 0, you're going to get some calories typically with it. Um, so anyway, that's just something to kind of keep in mind. This is another little thing. Now, this is kind of just I don't know how to say it. We shouldn't be eating a lot of cookies on a diet. We shouldn't be eating a lot of cookies regardless, even if we're not trying to lose weight, right? So, but cookies, pastry items, um, they're commonly using hydrogenated oils, and that's what I pointed to there with the little blow up thing. Hydrogenated means trans fat. So if you see that word hydrogenated, you're going to get the trans fats. So the reason it says 0 grams, it's kind of like the spray butter. So you go up and look at the serving size is 2 cookies. So within 2 cookies, there's less than 1 gram of trans fat That's what it means. And actually it's less than half a gram, is what the law says with this. So if it's less than half a gram, they can just say 0. Well, actually, you are getting trans fat. It's just that it's a fraction of a gram. I think that's a little deceptive, to be honest. I don't like that we have that sort of law. I would rather just see the fraction of a gram, because I think trans fat especially is pretty bad for us. We really don't want that at all. And I think that would be kind of a nice consumer education to know that, well, this cookie has no trans fat, but this one does. Maybe I don't want to have this cookie, for my treat or whatever. So that's just something else to keep in mind. It's not a huge thing. Again, if you're eating a lot of cookies, you're probably not doing not doing yourself a favor for a lot of reasons. But um, that's just a label quirk that I like to point out to people. You got to be a little careful sometimes with these labels when they say 0. Usually 0 is not really 0. So another little interesting thing about nutrition and labeling and foods and things is spices like thyme or paprika or just any number of spices, coffee, they are exempt from the National Labeling and Education Act. So they don't have to actually put any sort of food label on those, which is kind of interesting in a way. Um, the thought is, I guess, that they don't really provide nutrition as such. They're just sort of a flavor aid. There are nutrients in these items, and if you want to get into the weeds, you can go to the USDA food database on the internet, and you can put in thyme or paprika, and it will give you a breakdown of nutrients. I mean, you'll probably find magnesium and copper and selenium and just all kinds of weird little nutrients in there, micronutrients. So it's not devoid of nutrients, but for labeling purposes, they don't have to list them, and they really don't have calories. So for weight management, spices are wonderful because there's no calories. If you get the pure spices and herbs, you're not going to get sodium either. So they are great. They're really great to use in cooking and to help us manage our weight. I mean, I can't say enough about them. They're tremendous, but just realize there's no label there. All righty, so show and tell, Q&A. So what I'm going to do, see if I can switch back to my camera here. And we've got a few minutes here before I start boiling water. So let me see here. Da, 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 da. Let's stop the sharing. And okay, hopefully you guys are seeing my face again. So if you're not seeing my face, unmute and say, Bert, I can't see you anymore. Or I'm seeing a blank screen, or I see warning Will Robinson or something. So Cheerios, I don't know how well this shows up, but this is a box right out of my cupboard. And there's a lot of nutrients on there. Now it may show up backwards as far as how it's reading, but what I wanted to say is, I mean, this label is a little different. We got vitamin D, calcium, iron, potassium, vitamin A, vitamin C, thiamine, niacin, vitamin B6, folate, vitamin B12, phosphorus, magnesium, zinc. And it's interesting. I've had kidney patients before that, they are watching their phosphorus and their potassium, and they like the cereal boxes because they will show that. Um, Unfortunately, if you're on a specialized diet like that, food labels are not going to really help you too much. And you do sort of have to go to the food database, work with a dietitian. We can kind of guide you as far as which foods are high phosphorus, which are low. Um, it's hard sometimes if you have a special diet like that. But it's interesting, I think, to see that there are some products that do list that. Another one that's more traditional, we got just the oats. This is your steel cut oats. You can see the label there. That's more like your standard sort of example label that we talked about earlier. So you have kind of your primary nutrients, the nutrients of concern, like the saturated fat, trans fat. They got the total sugars, added sugars. That's right down the line of your typical sort of, FDA approved label. Um, what I wanted to say without belaboring it too much, because I want to cook my rice and stuff. And actually, I'm going to start my rice while I'm thinking about it here. I'm going to start the water, so it'll start boiling here. Um, I get a lot of questions. I'm just going to pass it along here. I get questions about what is processed foods, and it's been in the news lately a lot more about processed foods not being good for us, and what is a processed food, what's not. Um, there is not, unfortunately, a real strict line like this is processed over here, this is unprocessed over here. Processing really, I mean, if you think about it, if you can your own cucumbers, if you have a garden and you can your cucumbers to make pickles, you're processing. So that's a processed food, but you're doing the processing yourself at home. But I mean, it's not just the raw cucumber. You take the cucumber out of the garden, slice it up. That is not processed. I mean, but if you want to split hairs, you could say, well, the act of cutting it with a knife, that's processing. So a purely unprocessed food, you would go out to your garden, yank the cucumber off, and just start eating it. Um, most of the food that we have is processed to one degree or another. I mean, just in order sometimes to make it edible, to cook it, is a process as well. But generally what we mean by processed versus unprocessed, when you see it as far as like a study that's being done, or they're looking into, the health benefits of unprocessed foods, what they're really talking about is when you have, let's say, a snack food, let's say Cheetos. Not to pick on Cheetos, but it's kind of like donuts or whatever. It's not a healthy food. I think we can all agree. That is a sort of a creation of food scientists. It's not definitely not an unprocessed food. It's not a natural food. Um, these things are cooked at very high temperatures. They're subjected to, a lot of different things as far as preservatives, food coloring agents. Usually you look at the list when you see an ingredient list that's a mile long, that's usually a bad sign. That's usually kind of saying, this is pretty highly processed. When you process things like that, a lot of times you strip it from things like fiber. The white bread products come to mind. I mean, really there's not a lot of fiber there. You also lose a lot of the vitamins that are in sort of the seed of the wheat. Um, that gets stripped out as well, to give you a more fluffy texture to improve shelf life. Um, so that's the processing. So we want to get away from that as much as we do. There seems to be long-term health ramifications from eating highly processed things like Cheetos and crackers and chips and stuff like that we all seem to have grown up on, and they're ubiquitous, and all of us do it. We want to try to minimize that. And when we look at something like steel cut oats, which is why I had the oats box, I'll bring it up here again, oats. Um, Steel cut oats are really not processed other than they had to cut the oat. I mean, it's cut. The ingredient label has one ingredient, oats. That's about as unprocessed as you're going to get, other than, again, fresh fruits and vegetables. As much as we can get towards that as we can, that's what we want to do. So, interesting thing about the topic tonight is, food labels. The foods without the labels are the best, generally. The more foods without labels we have in our life, the better. Um, with some exceptions, probably, but generally, generally foods without labels, you're looking at more of the fresh fruits and vegetables, fresh meats, dried beans. Well, even the dried beans have a label, I guess, but along those lines, that's what we want to shoot for, if that makes sense. So I just wanted to get that out there. So what I'm going to do is pull this up on my tripod here, and we're going to go to the view of my stovetop as we move into the cooking segment here. And I show you my pots and stuff. Hopefully, I have to bend things around a little bit. So I am boiling up some water here that I'm going to have some rice. Now, going along with that processed argument, um, generally you want to do brown rice. Am I doing brown rice tonight? No, I'm not. I'm a bad dietitian. Um, the reason I'm not is because, like a lot of you, I ran out of stuff and I had some white rice in there, and I was not able to get to the store today to get the brown. Normally I would do brown. I actually like brown better. Um, I think it has a better texture. I sort of like. It does take a lot longer to cook. So I cooked the fish already. Let me see if I can show you that on the camera. And maybe before I do that, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here a little bit. Let me show you the actual recipe real quick. Let me share you my screen again. Let me go back to screen. Um, so this is what we are doing tonight as far as my meal. So yeah, pretend that the rice I'm going to have is brown and you're good to go. So this is from USDA My Plate, and it's Parmesan fish. And so you saw me sort of put that into the oven. It dinged a while ago. It's actually done now. All that was is a little shake and bake thing with some Parmesan cheese, a little bit of flour, and some thyme. I shook that around with these fish fillets, 4 fish fillets. They were all supposed to be whitefish or cod. I was crazy and wild, and I threw in some salmon in there. So, you know. Um, and then I have, and what I'm going to be cooking here in a couple seconds or sauteing is onion, mushrooms, green onions, and garlic. So what happened in the background while I was talking is the fish cooked, it finished, um, and uh, and that's about it. And I'm just going to be sauteing onion, mushroom, green onions, and garlic, and we will be topping that on the fish, and that'll be my dinner actually for a few days here probably. So so yeah, so I am starting boiling my rice. So we got the little timer going here, and yeah, so that's pretty much it. So the nutrition on this bad boy, 200 calories for a fish fillet. So that's not counting the rice. This is just the fish. Sodium very low, or I would say not very low, but it's moderate sodium. Very low sodium. There's a technical definition for that. I think you have to be below 100 milligrams. This is actually just sort of moderate, but it's good. You know, if you're watching your sodium, this is healthy. This is appropriate. Carbohydrates is actually very low for the fish. I mean, there's really not much carb in fish, not much fiber either. In fact, I'm shocked there's any fiber in fish, but this is probably fiber not from the fish, though. Honestly, this is the fiber from the mushroom and the onions and stuff. That's where that's coming from. Protein, very high in protein. I mean, yeah, this is a 6-ounce fillet they've got here on this label. So yeah, if it's a 6-ounce fillet, that's great for protein. And then yeah, it's pretty good with potassium. 780 is pretty high actually. And so that's what I mentioned. Why is this healthy? Why is it on the USDA page? You know, why do we care? So number one, it's low in calories. Number two, high protein in my mind. I didn't say that in the bullet point, but it's very high protein. Moderate in sodium, high in potassium. Potassium is great for your heart health. So is having very low saturated fat. It does have some fat. The fat that's there is primarily from the fish, and that's omega-3, and that's very healthy for your heart and inflammation. So that's why it's healthy. And 200 calories, and you can measure out your rice appropriately, get that baseball size or less, and you'll have a pretty low calorie dinner, honestly, or lunch or whatever you eat this for. And it's something that'll fit on your diet plan, whatever that might be. So that's the nutshell on that. So I'm going to attempt to switch back without hanging up on anyone or doing anything crazy here. So let's stop sharing. Alrighty, so we're back to watching me boil over my pot. We turn that down a little bit. Okay, so I got the rice cooking. What I'm going to do now is show you the fish, and hopefully it's not burned to a crisp. Um, so it is not, looks like it came out pretty good. So it has been sitting there for a little while, so it's no longer super hot, but hopefully you can kind of see on the camera a little bit there. So it's got some of the thyme on there, and it's just some different fish fillets. Interestingly, the salmon sort of kind of turned a more white color there, I guess, with the flour and stuff and the seasoning packet and the Parmesan cheese. So they all kind of looked white, but that's the finished product. So I got 4 good fillets there. Now some of those fillets are a little smaller. They're definitely not 4 ounces, maybe 3 ounces or 2 ounces even. So, so you, just like anything, you have to kind of decide what's appropriate for you, what you want to do for your portions, and use the right thing. There's a lot of wiggle room with cooking. You just want to make sure with like fish or anything that you cook it thoroughly, that it flakes easily, that it's not kind of mushy in the middle. Um, Food thermometer is good to have on hand. Food safety for any kind of meat. If you get to 165, you're safe. Fish, it's a little lower. It's like 145, I believe, for fish. I'd have to double check on that, but I believe it's about 145. I tend to overcook my stuff because I'm always worried about microorganisms. So I will cook it to 160, 165. My fish might be a little drier than other people's, but I definitely am not interested in any sort of, as they used to say in my biology class in high school, wee beasties, microorganisms that are not good for us. So what I'm going to do now is a little saute thing here. So I spray a little bit of olive oil spray. Olive oil is a little tricky. It's not the best really for frying stuff, to be honest, because it will burn. So I have to kind of use lower settings on the heat. And well, people ask me what's a good oil to use. Well, of course, for weight management, you don't want to use a lot of oil and you want to fry stuff much anyway. The purpose of the oil on this is just as a lubricant, really, to sort of help. And it also transfers heat. It sort of helps cook when you have the heat transfer of the oil. I don't use it in terms of, I want a heavy oil to really kind of be labor down my food and add a lot of calories. That's not my goal with the oil. It's more of a physics issue, just trying to cook the stuff. I've got a non-stick pan, so it's not really going to stick without the oil. But I do feel like it cooks a little better. It gives a little bit of a better texture, I think. And the spray oil is so minimal of calories that, I mean, I don't even, it's sort of like the spray butter. If you just do a little spritz on there, it's, you might be looking at 10 or 20 calories. So what this is mushroom, onion, green onion. So there's like a sweet onion in here, green onion. And I threw in a little bit, just a tiny little bit of habanero because I'm growing peppers in my garden and I had half of a habanero floating around and I wanted to just go ahead and use it. So you see a little bit of yellow in there. I don't even know if the camera will pick it up, but habanero is not for everyone. It is very, very, very hot pepper. I grew up in Arizona where we ate peppers all the time, and I sort of developed a taste for that. And if you hear a meowing sound, there's a cat, and she smells the fish, and she's going crazy. So I may divert here for just a second, give her a little piece of fish so that she won't continue to meow. I had somebody once in one of my videos, they saw her in the background. They said, "Do you have a little dog back there?" I'm like, "No, that's my cat." And she's very vocal, and she likes to be part of the show, so you'll hear her going crazy. And now she's got fish, so she'll be good. Sorry I couldn't show you that on camera. That would have been entertaining, but all righty. So any questions from anybody? I can kind of answer your questions while we're watching this saute here, and I'll adjust my temperatures, try to get it going. And if you want to, you can type your question in the comments in the chat, and I can pick it up there. Or if you just want to unmute, you can do that as well. Hopefully you guys are still hearing me and you didn't all wander away somewhere. Anybody, anywhere? Anyone still hearing me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, so there's life out there. Great.
There is.
The one thing with the virtual, I will say, I think is a little awkward, and I may not be the best at this, but with in-person, there's a lot more back and forth. There's more kind of questions and answers. There's more interaction with people. With virtual, it's kind of like if you upset the apple cart too much, you have technical issues, and there's just not as much of that back and forth. And people are more reluctant to chime in and talk on virtual. I don't know why, but they get more shy when it's on the computer. So it's a different experience, but please don't be shy. If you have questions, if you just want to say, good job, Bert, if you say, oh, Bert, this sucks, or whatever you want to say, try to be polite. But I mean, if there's anything you'd like to ask, please, feel free to throw it out there. This back burner is not very hot, apparently, and I need to turn it up a little more. Still kind of adjusting to this stove. We got this stove a couple of years ago. It's an induction stove. Does anyone in the audience have an induction cooktop by any chance? No? No inductions out there? How many people use a gas cooktop? How many people have a cooktop?
We love ours. With teenagers, it makes cooking cleanup so much easier.
You have the gas?
No, it's electric cooktop.
Oh, electric. Okay. Is it like the flat panel kind of one, or is it the coils?
No, it's the flat panel.
Okay. I
I
grew up
would
with
have
the
killed me some teenagers if I had coils.
I grew up with the coil style. Um, my last house I lived in, they had the flat electric one. And when I was going through school for dietetics, the test kitchen, they had these inductive ones, and I just thought they were really cool. So I wanted to get an inductive, and it is pretty cool. You do have to have magnetic type cookware. So if you're a cookware, if you can't take a magnet, like a magnet off the refrigerator and stick it on the pot, it's not going to work on an inductive burner. So you do have to kind of deal with that, but the temperature comes up instantly. It's really crazy. Um, but it comes up instantly and stuff will boil like really fast, and it's kind of cool, but you have to get used to it. It's a little different. Um, gas is long been considered to be sort of I guess the best way to cook or whatever. I know chefs prefer it. I think induction though is also right up there. I don't know if it's replaced gas in terms of the chefs out there or not, but so I'm just kind of cooking this, to taste, I guess, or whatever. I just like to kind of get the mushrooms a little more cooked. Right now they're still a little pale, crunchy or whatever. And just kind of saute that until it reaches the point where you're happy. The rice has pretty much done its thing, so I'm just going to turn that off. And when I'm done, I've got my little Pyrex here. I can put that medley in there, and then I can sort of sprinkle it over my fish and with my rice. And I usually I don't know what other people do. For some reason, I typically will just cook up the rice fresh every night and do it that way rather than cooking up a batch of rice. But I mean, either way is fine, I guess. I like to encourage people to make things ahead just because it takes less burden off of you when you come home from work. You can sort of reheat something versus having to cook it up. But boiling water for rice is such a trivial thing. Brown rice, it does take, I don't know, 45 minutes to cook it. So there might be a little more of an argument there to cook it ahead. But I've always just, for some reason, I always just like to cook it fresh as far as the rice goes. Anyway. That's looking pretty good. The onions are starting to get what they call translucent. It's pretty close. I think the recipe called for mushroom caps sliced. I just went to Food Lion and got some sliced mushrooms and called it good, but Yeah, I mean, I vary these recipes around to suit my needs, to suit what's in the grocery store. And, if you're not a chef or whatever, you don't like cooking much, I mean, just keep that in mind. Like these things are not like rigid. You can be creative and just cook with what's on hand. I mean, like I said, I just went to my garden, threw in a pepper for kicks. I had a different type of fish. I mixed the fish together. That's what I had on hand. Um, you know, that's one thing I've learned about it. And I am not a chef, but I've learned that the stuff is not, it's there's a lot of you can do a lot of different things and it'll still come out pretty good. But in terms of nutrition, you just have to be careful. Like I don't want to add a bunch of cheese or, suddenly pour in tablespoons of oil. That's definitely going to change the nutritional stats and your calories. So any questions on anything at all before we sort of wrap it up? Because I think this is pretty much it's pretty much all she wrote as far as this goes here, the cooking part. I wish I could give you guys some, but virtual classes, we don't do that. It'd be kind of hard. Now, if it was in person, and I did do an in-person class end of August, we did have a salad that was made with vegetables grown in the Carilion garden with Angela. She brought those in, another dietitian. That was really, really great. And it's fun to be able to share foods with people, in person. So we'll see what happens next year. Hopefully, I'll start doing some more of those. So, any questions, any thoughts, any feedback, anything from out there? All right. Well, I'm not hearing anything, so some of you guys may have trouble with unmuting your mics too. I understand there's always technical hurdles too sometimes, so that's okay. So just an announcement. I am hoping at least tentatively to do a class end of next month, end of October. So keep an eye on that. If you're interested in these classes, if you like to hear me talk about nutrition and different topics, keep that in mind. That'll be coming up. Probably it's not on the calendar yet. Give it about a week or two. It'll show up on the calendar. It'll be just like this class. It'll be free and you just kind of get an email and you click on the link. What I'm also going to do is for those of you who attended tonight, I'm going to send out some stuff to the email that you use to register. It's just a simple, it's going to show you the recipe from tonight and it'll give you some tips on what we talked about as far as label reading and stuff like that. So be looking for that. Looks like we had about 5 or 6 people tonight. I'll send you that information probably on Monday, Tuesday. Be looking for that. So that's about it. Thank you all for attending. I really appreciate it. It's always fun to do these. And I hope you have a great rest of your week and welcome to fall and the nice weather.
Thank
All right.
you.
You're so welcome. Take care, everyone. I see someone's typing something here. Let's wait and see. Oh, thank you for your lecture. You're welcome. You're very welcome. All right, bye for now. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
And enjoy your dinner.